Part 1. The cold bit through the thin cotton of her dress, sharp as broken glass against skin that had long stopped expecting warmth. Elara Morthen stood in the narrow corridor of the servant quarters beneath the Silverglen fortress, her bare feet pressed against stone that held the mountain's ancient chill. Around her, the walls wept with condensation, and somewhere in the darkness beyond her small window, wolves howled their evening song to a moon she was forbidden to answer. She was 19 years old, and she had learned to make herself small. It had not always been this way. Once, the name Morthen had meant something in the mountain capital. Her father had been a warrior, a captain in the royal guard, and her brother Torin had walked the palace halls with his head high and his sword at his side. Once, Elara had believed that honor was a shield that could protect a family, that loyalty to the crown meant safety, that the bonds of pack were stronger than ambition or greed. She had been a child then, foolish and full of dreams. The fire had come on a winter night much like this one, 6 years ago. She remembered waking to smoke and screams, to the crash of her bedroom door splintering inward, her mother's voice, hoarse with terror, shouting for them to run. The heat of flames licking up the walls, devouring tapestries and timber with hungry orange mouths. And then her father, silhouetted against the inferno, pushing Torin and Elara toward the window, toward escape, toward life. She remembered his eyes, not afraid, resigned. They had made it out, barely. Her mother had not. The official report called it an accident, a kitchen fire spread by careless servants. But Elara had seen the oil trails on the floor, smelled the accelerant mixed with wood smoke. She had heard the whispers in the days that followed, the rumors that her father had been asking too many questions about missing funds from the royal treasury, that he had discovered something the council preferred remain hidden. No investigation was launched. No justice was sought. The Morthen family was simply erased from relevance, their lands seized for unpaid debts that appeared overnight, their titles revoked, their names stricken from the rolls of honored families. Her father lasted 3 months before grief consumed him. He died in his sleep, they said, though Elara knew it was his heart that had given up, broken by loss and betrayal. That left only her and Torin. Her brother had been 17 then, strong and fierce and determined to reclaim what had been stolen from them. He took work where he could find it, hired his sword to merchants and minor nobles, saved every coin with the single-minded focus of a man who believed justice was still possible. He told Elara stories at night, promised her that one day they would stand before the Alpha King himself and demand an accounting, that truth would prevail over corruption. Elara had wanted to believe him. She had tried. But 3 years ago, Torin had gone to the capital for a routine guard contract during the lunar festival, and he had never come home. His body was found in the river 2 weeks later, bloated and broken, his throat torn out in what the authorities declared was a rogue wolf attack. Case closed. Another tragedy for the forgotten Morthen line. Elara had been 16 when they brought her brother back in a wooden box. She had stood alone at his pyre, watching the flames take the last person who had ever loved her, and she had made herself a promise. She would find out what happened to Torin. She would uncover the truth that had killed her family, and she would make those responsible pay, even if it took the rest of her life. But first, she had to survive. With no family, no title, and no coin, Elara had fallen through the cracks of Silverglen society like a stone through dark water. She found work in the fortress kitchens, scrubbing pots and hauling water for the noble families who now occupied her childhood home. She kept her head down, spoke only when spoken to, and endured the casual cruelty of those who saw her as little more than a ghost of a disgraced bloodline. The other servants whispered about her. They said she was cursed, that the Morthen family had been marked by the moon for their sins. They said her wolf was weak, barely able to shift, a pathetic creature that proved the family's fall was deserved. They said she was dangerous, unstable, that grief had broken something inside her that would never heal. Let them whisper. Elara had learned that invisibility was a kind of armor. The less they saw her, the more freely she could move through the fortress, listening and watching and gathering the pieces of a puzzle that no one else cared to solve. She had discovered patterns. Torin's death had not been random. In the months before he died, 3 other young wolves with connections to the royal guard had also met untimely ends, all ruled accidents or rogue attacks, all conveniently occurring after they had been assigned to security details for high-ranking council members. The official records were scrubbed clean, but Alara had learned to read between the lines, to follow the trails of silver that flowed through the capital like poison in a bloodstream. Someone was killing wolves who saw too much, someone with power and protection, someone who could make bodies disappear and questions die. And now, the Luna trial was beginning. Alara had known this day would come. Every unmated female wolf in the Asterian royal pack between the ages of 18 and 25 was required by ancient law to present themselves for the trial, a brutal competition designed to test strength, cunning, and worthiness to stand beside the Alpha King. The winner would become Luna, second only to the throne itself, bound to the most powerful male in the kingdom by magic and fate. It was every young wolf's dream. It was Alara's nightmare. She had no desire to be Luna. She had no desire to be seen at all. The trial would place her directly in the spotlight, under the scrutiny of the council and the watchful eyes of those who might remember that the Morthen family had once been close to the crown, close enough to learn dangerous secrets. If she performed well, if she drew attention, if she gave them any reason to see her as a threat rather than a broken, harmless girl, they would eliminate her just as they had eliminated everyone else she loved. But the law was absolute. Failure to appear meant execution for defying royal decree. There was no escape, so Alara had formed a plan. She would enter the trial. She would ensure she failed spectacularly in the earliest rounds. She would be dismissed as weak, unremarkable, beneath notice. And once she was released from her obligation, she would disappear back into the shadows and continue her investigation, continue searching for the truth that had cost her everything. All she had to do was convince the entire kingdom that she was nothing. The morning of the first trial dawned gray and bitter, clouds pressing low over Silver Glen's jagged peaks. Alara dressed in the simple white shift provided to all candidates, a uniform meant to strip away status and present each female as equal before the Alpha King's judgment. The fabric was thin, offering no protection against the mountain cold, and as she joined the line of young women filing into the fortress courtyard, she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes turning toward them. The courtyard had been transformed into an arena. Stone benches rose in tiers around a central fighting pit, packed with nobles and commoners alike, all eager to witness the spectacle. At the far end, elevated on a platform of black marble, sat the Council of Elders, 7 ancient wolves whose word was law in the absence of the Alpha King. And beside them, still empty, was the throne itself, carved from a single piece of moonstone that seemed to glow with its own internal light. Alara kept her eyes down as she took her place among the other candidates. There were perhaps 200 of them, daughters of noble houses and merchant families, warriors and scholars, each one radiating confidence and ambition. They had trained for this moment their entire lives. They believed they deserved to win. Alara believed she deserved to lose. The first test was simple and savage: combat. Each candidate would face a series of opponents in the pit, fighting in wolf form until one submitted or was rendered unable to continue. It was meant to demonstrate strength, resilience, and dominance, the fundamental qualities of a Luna who would help lead the pack through war and peace. Alara watched as the first matches began, wolves tearing into each other with teeth and claws, the crowd roaring its approval. Blood stained the sand, bones cracked. And through it all, the council watched with cold, calculating eyes, taking notes and whispering among themselves. When her name was called, Alara stepped into the pit on legs that shook only slightly. Her opponent was a tall, muscular woman from the Northern Territories, her wolf form a massive gray beast with scars that spoke of countless victories. The crowd murmured, already dismissing Alara as an easy kill. Good. The shift came naturally, despite what the servants said. Alara's wolf was small and lean, her fur a pale silver that seemed almost white in the morning light. She was built for speed rather than strength, for survival rather than dominance. Exactly what she needed them to see. The fight, if it could be called that, lasted less than a minute. The gray wolf lunged, and Alara darted aside, not to attack, but simply to avoid being crushed. She circled, keeping her head low, her tail tucked, every line of her body screaming submission. When the gray wolf snapped at her throat, Alara rolled onto her back, exposing her belly, whining her surrender. The crowd laughed. The gray wolf stepped back, contempt clear in her eyes. The judge called the match. Alara shifted back to human form, keeping her expression carefully neutral, even as relief flooded through her. She had done it. She had lost without sustaining serious injury, without drawing any attention beyond mild mockery. She was one step closer to freedom. But as she turned to leave the pit, she felt it. A prickling awareness along her spine, the sensation of being watched by something far more dangerous than the wolves around her. She glanced up toward the platform, and her breath caught. The Alpha King had arrived. Kalen Draven sat upon the Moonstone throne like violence barely contained, his presence so overwhelming that the crowd had fallen silent without realizing it. He was young for a king, perhaps 27, but there was nothing soft in the hard lines of his face or the cold intelligence in his amber eyes. He wore black leather and steel, no crown but the authority that radiated from him like heat from a forge. His dark hair was pulled back, revealing the ritual scars that marked his ascension, and even from across the courtyard, Alara could feel the weight of his power pressing down on her like a physical force. He was terrifying, absolute, lethal, and he was staring directly at her. Alara froze. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance, and she saw something flicker in his expression, something that looked almost like recognition. His head tilted slightly, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with warning. Then one of the council members leaned over to whisper in his ear, and the connection broke. The Alpha King's attention shifted away, and Alara forced herself to move, to climb out of the pit and return to her place among the candidates, her heart hammering against her ribs. It meant nothing. He had probably just been surveying the competitors. She was being paranoid. But as the trials continued throughout the day, Alara could not shake the feeling that she was still being watched, that somewhere in the crowd, those amber eyes were tracking her every movement. The second trial came 3 days later. This time, they were tested on their ability to channel lunar magic, the ancient power that flowed through every wolf but manifested strongest in those with royal blood or exceptional gifts. Each candidate was required to call upon the moon's light, to draw it into themselves and demonstrate control. Alara stood in line, watching as young women raised their hands and summoned streams of silver light, weaving it into shapes and patterns that drew gasps from the crowd. Some were clumsy, their magic wild and unfocused. Others were breathtaking, creating illusions of wolves running through starlight or trees blooming with flowers of pure luminescence. When it was Alara's turn, she stepped forward and reached for the power she knew was there, coiled deep inside her like a sleeping serpent. She had felt it since childhood, this connection to the moon that her mother had told her was a gift from their ancestors. But she had also learned to suppress it, to keep it hidden, because power made you visible and visibility made you a target. Now, she let only the barest trickle through. A weak flicker of light appeared around her hand, sputtered, and died. The crowd murmured in disappointment. The judges marked her score. Failure, as intended. But as Alara lowered her hand and turned to leave, she felt it again. That gaze. She looked up toward the throne and found the Alpha King leaning forward slightly, his expression unreadable, but his attention fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He had seen something. She was certain of it. But what? The trials continued. Hunting, strategy, endurance. In each, Alara carefully calibrated her performance to be just good enough to avoid suspicion of deliberate failure, but poor enough to ensure she would never advance to the final rounds. She stumbled during the hunt, allowing her prey to escape. She made obvious tactical errors during the strategy game, moves so clumsy that even the other candidates winced. She collapsed halfway through the endurance run, gasping and shaking, playing up weakness that was only partially feigned. With each failure, she sank lower in the rankings. With each dismissive glance from the judges, she felt safer. But the Alpha King never looked away. On the 7th day, the first round of eliminations was announced. 2/3 of the candidates would be sent home, their obligation fulfilled, their chance at the throne ended. Elara stood in the courtyard with the others, waiting for her name to appear on the list of the dismissed. It did not come. One by one, wolves were called forward to receive their release papers. One by one, they left, some crying, others relieved. The crowd thinned. The sun climbed higher. And still, Elara's name was not called. Finally, only 20 candidates remained. The judges stepped forward, and the head elder, a silver-haired woman named Vesper, raised her hand for silence. "These are the finalists," she announced, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "These 20 will proceed to the palace for the final trials. One of them will become our Luna." No, this was wrong. Elara had failed every test. She had been weak, pathetic, unremarkable. There was no reason for her to still be here. She looked up at the platform and found the Alpha King standing now, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression carved from stone. And as their eyes met once more, she saw the corner of his mouth lift in something that might have been a smile, cold and knowing. He had done this. Somehow, he had kept her in the competition. But why? That night, Elara was moved from the servant quarters to the candidate wing of the palace, a section of the fortress reserved for those competing for the throne. Her new room was small but clean, with an actual bed and a window that looked out over the mountain valleys below. It was more comfort than she had known in years, and it felt like a cage. She could not stay here. She could not allow herself to advance any further. The closer she got to the throne, the more visible she became. And visibility meant death. She had to find a way to be eliminated in the next trial, even if it meant risking injury or public humiliation beyond what she had already endured. But as she sat on the edge of her bed, staring out at the moonlit peaks, a knock came at her door. Elara tensed. Visitors were not permitted during the trial period. She crossed to the door slowly, every instinct screaming warning, and opened it just a crack. A man stood in the hallway, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the black uniform of the Royal Guard. His face was hard, his eyes flat, and when he spoke, his voice was devoid of warmth. "The Alpha King requests your presence in the Lunar Hall. Now." Elara's mouth went dry. "I don't understand. The trials are not resumed until tomorrow." "This is not about the trials. The king wishes to speak with you privately. You will come." It was not a request. It was a command. And as Elara followed the guard through the silent palace corridors, she felt the weight of her carefully constructed plan crumbling around her like ash, and she understood with terrible clarity that she had never been invisible at all. The Alpha King had been watching her from the very beginning, and now he wanted answers. Part 2. The Lunar Hall was a place of legends, whispered about in the servant quarters but never seen by those below a certain rank. As the guard led Elara through corridors that grew progressively grander, the stone walls giving way to polished marble veined with silver, she felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her. Ancient tapestries depicted the first wolves who had walked these mountains, their eyes woven with thread that caught the torchlight and seemed to follow her passage. The air itself felt different here, charged with old magic that made her skin prickle, and her wolf stir restlessly beneath her human form. They passed no other guards, no servants. The palace at this hour was a tomb of silence, and Elara's footsteps echoed too loud against the marble floor, despite her attempts to move quietly. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to run, to flee back to the shadows where she belonged, but the guard's hand rested casually on the pommel of his sword, a reminder that she was not here by choice. Finally, they stopped before a set of double doors carved from black wood and inlaid with silver in patterns that hurt to look at directly, symbols that shifted and rearranged themselves if you watched too long. The guard knocked once, a sharp sound that seemed to reverberate through Elara's chest, and then the doors opened on silent hinges. "Enter," came a voice from within, deep and commanding, the kind of voice that expected obedience without question. The guard stepped aside. Elara took a breath, steadied herself, and walked into the lunar hall alone. The room took her breath away despite her fear. It was circular, the domed ceiling rising high above her head, and painted to depict the night sky in such detail that she could have sworn she saw stars actually twinkling in the darkness. The walls were lined with windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, revealing the mountain landscape bathed in moonlight, and in the center of the room stood a raised platform with a pool of water so still it looked like black glass. The moon's reflection floated on its surface, perfect and undisturbed. And standing beside the pool, silhouetted against the windows, was the Alpha King. Kalen Draven did not turn when she entered. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the mountains, his profile sharp and unforgiving in the moonlight. He had removed his formal attire and now wore simple black clothing that somehow made him look even more dangerous, predatory grace in every line of his body. The ritual scars on his forearms were visible now, intricate patterns that marked him as not just king, but something older, something bound to the pack itself through blood and magic. Ilara stopped several paces away, uncertain whether to speak or wait. The silence stretched between them, taut and heavy, until finally he spoke without looking at her. "Tell me, Ilara Morthen, do you think I am a fool?" The question was delivered in a conversational tone, almost casual, but there was steel beneath it. Ilara's throat tightened. "Your Majesty, I don't understand." "Don't." He turned then, and the full force of his attention hit her like a physical blow. His amber eyes were too knowing, too intelligent, and they pinned her in place as surely as if he had gripped her by the throat. "Do not insult me with confusion. You understand perfectly. I am asking if you believe the Alpha King of the Asterian royal pack is so blind, so incompetent, that he would fail to notice when a candidate deliberately sabotages her own performance in the Luna trial." Ice flooded through Ilara's veins. He knew. Of course he knew. She had been arrogant to think otherwise, to believe that careful mediocrity would be enough to fool a wolf who had held the throne for 7 years through cunning and ruthlessness in equal measure. "I failed the trials honestly," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I am weak. Everyone knows this. I should not have advanced at all." "Weak?" Kalen moved toward her, each step deliberate and controlled, closing the distance between them with the patience of a hunter who knows his prey has nowhere to run. Weak wolves do not survive 6 years of poverty and persecution. Weak wolves do not endure the destruction of their entire family and emerge with their sanity intact. Weak wolves certainly do not possess the kind of lunar magic that I felt radiating from you during the second trial. Power so tightly controlled and suppressed that it took every ounce of my own considerable ability to detect it at all. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could feel the heat of his body, smell the winter pine and steel scent that clung to his skin. Her wolf whined inside her, confused by the strange pull she felt toward this male, the instinctive urge to submit, and the equally strong urge to bare her teeth and fight. "You are many things, Ilara Morthen," he continued, his voice dropping lower, more intimate and therefore more threatening. "But weak is not one of them, so I will ask you again, and this time I suggest you tell me the truth. Why are you trying so desperately to fail?" Ilara's mind raced. Every answer she could give was dangerous. If she told him about her investigation into Torin's death, he might see her as a threat to pack stability and have her eliminated. If she revealed that she suspected corruption within his own council, he might be complicit himself. If she said nothing, he would simply compel the truth from her through other means. Alpha Kings had ways of extracting information from wolves, ancient rights written into pack law that gave them power over every member of their territory. She chose a fragment of truth, the only piece that might buy her mercy. "I did not wish to be Luna," she said quietly. "I have no desire for power or position. I only want to be left alone. Everyone wants to be left alone until circumstances force them into the light." Kalen studied her face, and she had the uncomfortable sensation that he was reading thoughts she had not spoken aloud. "But that is not the whole truth. You are not simply avoiding responsibility. You are hiding. From what? Or from whom? From everyone. From you." The words came out sharper than she intended, fueled by exhaustion and fear and the strange, unsettling energy that crackled between them. I am the daughter of a disgraced family. My presence in the palace is an insult to the nobles who now occupy what was once my home. The longer I remain visible, the more danger I am in. So yes, I tried to fail. I tried to disappear back into the shadows where I have survived for the past 6 years. Is that a crime? Something flickered across Kalen's face, too quick to identify. No, but it is a waste. A waste of what? Of you. He turned away, moving back toward the pool, and Alara could breathe again, though the air still felt too thin. I have been Alpha King since I was 20 years old. Do you know what that means? It means I was barely more than a boy when my father died in battle and the council crowned me before his body was cold. It means I have spent every day of the past 7 years fighting to maintain control of a pack that still sees me as too young, too inexperienced, too willing to question traditions that have stood for centuries. I have enemies on the council. I have rivals among the noble houses. I have generals who smile to my face and plot my assassination in private. And through it all, I have been forced to play a game where every move is watched, every decision scrutinized, every moment of weakness exploited. He paused at the pool's edge, staring down at the moon's reflection. The Luna trial was not my idea. The council demanded it. They believe a king without a mate is vulnerable, incomplete, a liability to pack stability. They chose this year, this month, specifically because they know I have been resisting the bond. They want to force my hand, to saddle me with a Luna chosen for her family connections or political usefulness, someone who will serve their interests rather than mine. Alara said nothing, unsure where this confession was leading, but sensing that interruption would shatter whatever fragile honesty had entered the room. And then you appeared, Kalen continued, his voice carrying a strange note she could not quite name. A ghost of a family I remember from childhood, walking into my arena with death in your eyes and power leaking through every crack in your careful mask. You threw your matches so artlessly that anyone with eyes could see the deception, and yet the judges did not notice because they expected nothing from you. You dimmed your magic so thoroughly that the elder who tested you marked you as barely functional, never realizing that the control required to suppress lunar power of that magnitude is itself a demonstration of extraordinary ability. He turned to face her again, and this time his expression was unreadable. You are exactly what you claim not to be. Hidden, dangerous, and utterly wasted scrubbing pots in a kitchen. What do you want from me? Alara demanded, her patience finally fraying. If you know I was trying to fail, why keep me in the competition? Why summon me here? Just eliminate me and be done with it. Because I need you. The words hung in the air between them, stark and undeniable. Alara stared at him, certain she had misheard. You need me? You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you have survived impossible circumstances through intelligence and determination. I know you possess power you have never been trained to use, which means you are either naturally gifted or you have taught yourself control through sheer force of will. I know you have no loyalty to the noble families who betrayed yours, no reason to serve the council's interests, no political entanglements that would compromise your judgment, and most importantly, I know you do not want to be here, which makes you the only candidate in this entire trial who would not seek to use the position of Luna for personal gain. He took a step closer, and Alara found herself trapped between the urge to retreat and the strange magnetism that seemed to pull her toward him despite every rational thought screaming warnings. The council wants to control me through my mate, Kalen said quietly. They want a Luna who will whisper their suggestions in my ear, who will use her influence to bend my decisions toward their preferences, who will ultimately weaken the throne enough that they can seize more power for themselves. But if I choose a Luna who has no interest in playing their games, who actively resists the position, who would rather be anywhere else than at my side. He smiled, and it was cold and calculated and absolutely ruthless. Then I remain free. And they remain frustrated. Understanding crashed over Alara like ice water. You want to use me as a shield, a political tool to block the council's manipulations. I want to use you as what you actually are. An ally who has as much reason to hate the current power structure as I do. Someone who will not be swayed by promises of wealth or status, because you have already lost everything they could possibly threaten to take away. His eyes bored into hers. Your family was destroyed by corruption within this court. My throne is threatened by that same corruption. We have a common enemy, Alara Morthen. The only question is whether you have the courage to stand beside me and fight, or whether you will continue hiding in the shadows while they pick us off one by one. You are insane. The words escaped before she could stop them. I am not Luna material. I have no training, no standing, no... You have power. You have intelligence. And most crucially, you have nothing left to lose. Kaylin's voice took on an edge. I researched your family after I first saw you in the arena. The fire that killed your mother was arson, though the investigation was shut down within days. Your father's deaths were fabricated by a member of the council who wanted your family's lands for his own son, and your brother. He paused, watching her face carefully. Your brother died 2 weeks after he provided security for a council meeting where several members were arguing about treasury discrepancies. His death was ruled an accident, but the healer who examined his body noted that his injuries were inconsistent with a wolf attack. That report was sealed the same day, and the healer retired from service within the month. Alara's hands clenched into fists, her nails biting into her palms hard enough to draw blood. How do you know this? Because I have been looking for proof of council corruption for 3 years, ever since I discovered evidence that they were siphoning funds from the royal treasury to finance private armies. Torin's name appeared in my investigation. He saw something he should not have seen, and they killed him for it, just as they killed your parents for asking questions. Just as they will kill you if they realize you have spent the past 3 years conducting your own investigation into your brother's murder. The room tilted. Alara's breath came short and sharp, her vision narrowing to Kaylin's face, to the grim certainty in his eyes. You know about that. You have been watching me. Not watching. Protecting. His voice softened fractionally. Do you truly believe you survived these past 6 years through luck alone? That the nobles who hated your family allowed you to live in their fortress, to move through their halls, to exist at all out of some sudden mercy? I have had guards assigned to you since I learned of your brother's death. I made certain you were given positions that kept you fed and sheltered. I ensured that when anger toward the Morthen name flared, it was redirected elsewhere. And when the Luna trial was announced and I saw your name on the mandatory candidate list, I knew it was the opportunity I had been waiting for. Opportunity for what? To bring you into the palace where I could offer you a choice. Kaylin moved closer still, and now there was barely a breath between them. His presence overwhelming and strangely magnetic. Stand with me. Become my Luna. Not because you want power, but because together we can dismantle the corruption that killed your family and threatens my throne. Help me expose the council members who have been stealing from our people and murdering anyone who discovers their crimes. Use the position they tried to use against me as a weapon to destroy them instead. And if I refuse, then I will eliminate you from the trial as you wish, and you will return to the kitchens, and eventually they will realize you know too much, and they will kill you quietly in the night, and no one will care because you are nobody, Alara Morthen. You are a ghost in your own life. His hand rose, not quite touching her face, but close enough that she could feel the heat of his skin. Or you can step into the light and become the weapon they never saw coming. Alara's mind spun. Everything he said made a horrible kind of sense. She had been gathering evidence for years, but to what end? She had no power to demand justice. She had no platform from which to expose the guilty. She was exactly what he called her, a ghost, invisible and impotent, doomed to watch from the shadows while the people who murdered her family continued to prosper and plot. But this was different. This was a path to actual retribution. Dangerous, certainly. Potentially fatal, absolutely, but real. Why should I trust you? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You are the Alpha King. You are part of the system that destroyed my family. No, I am a prisoner of that system, just as you are a victim of it. Kaylin's expression was fierce. I was crowned at 20 because my father died fighting a war that the council provoked for profit. I have spent 7 years trying to reform laws and redistribute wealth while nobles fight me at every turn. I have proposed investigations into council corruption and been blocked by pack law that gives them immunity. I am king in name, but my power is limited by traditions designed to prevent any single wolf from threatening the aristocracy's control. They tolerate me because I am young, and they believe they can outlast me. They mock me in their private halls and wait for me to make a mistake they can exploit. His hand finally made contact, fingers gentle against her jaw, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. I need a mate who will not be controlled by them. I need a Luna who understands that this is war, not politics. And yes, I need someone whose survival depends on my survival, because trust is not built on promises, Alara. It is built on mutual necessity. We both want the same thing: justice for the families they destroyed, an end to the corruption that has rotted this pack from within. The only question is whether we will achieve it together or die separately. Alara's wolf surged forward, drawn by the Alpha's power and something else, something deeper that felt like recognition, like destiny brushing against her skin. She shoved it back down, refusing to acknowledge the strange pull that made her want to lean into his touch, to accept his offer without question. "I am not one of your nobles," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "I will not play political games or smile at people I hate or pretend to be something I am not. If I do this, if I become your Luna, then I do it on my terms. I investigate Torin's death. I follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it points to people you consider allies. And when we have proof, we burn them down, council and nobles and anyone else who conspired in murder. No mercy, no compromise. Complete destruction." A slow smile spread across Kaylin's face, sharp and approving. There she is. There is the wolf I saw beneath the pathetic performance in my arena. Yes, Alara Morthen. Those are my terms exactly. No mercy, no compromise. We become the nightmare they created when they decided our families were acceptable collateral damage in their schemes. He released her and stepped back, the sudden absence of his touch leaving her oddly cold. "Tomorrow, the final trials begin. You will compete properly this time. You will demonstrate the full extent of your abilities and you will win, because a Luna who appears weak will be challenged immediately and we cannot afford to show vulnerability. The council will object to my choice. The nobles will protest your lack of status. Let them. By the time they realize the trap they walked into, it will be too late. And if I cannot win?" Alara demanded. "The other candidates have trained their entire lives for this. I have spent the past 6 years hauling water and scrubbing floors. I am strong, but I am not invincible. You are stronger than you know. Your magic alone would be enough to secure victory if you unleashed even half of what I felt during the trial. But I will not leave this to chance." Kaylin moved to a table near the wall and retrieved a small wooden box, which he brought back and opened to reveal a silver pendant on a delicate chain. The pendant was carved in the shape of a wolf's head, and it pulsed with soft light that made Alara's wolf whine in recognition. "This is a lunar amplifier," Kaylin explained. "It was my mother's. She died when I was 8 years old, killed by the same war that claimed my father. Before she passed, she told me to give this to my mate, to the woman who would stand beside me and share the burden of the throne. I never thought I would actually use it." He held it out, and Alara stared at the pendant, understanding the significance of what he was offering. A Luna amplifier was more than jewelry. It was a conduit for magic, a tool that would allow her to channel power she had never been trained to access. And it was also a symbol of acceptance, of legitimacy, of a bond that went beyond politics or convenience. "If I take that," she said slowly, "then this becomes real. Not just a plan or a temporary alliance. You will be bound to me in the eyes of the pack. The binding is not the pendant. The binding is the choice we make tonight." Kaylin's voice was steady. "Wear this tomorrow and win the trials. Stand beside me when the council protests. Fight with me when they push back. And when we finally have enough evidence to move against them, we will strike together and end this corruption once and for all. That is the bond I am offering." Not romance or destiny or any of the other foolishness the pack believes about fated mates. Just two wolves who refuse to surrender to the people who tried to destroy us. Alara reached out and took the pendant from his hand. The metal was warm against her palm, pulsing with energy that sang through her bones and made her magic rise in answer. She felt it click into place, felt the connection form between her power and the amplifier, and suddenly the world seemed sharper, clearer, more vibrant than it had ever been. She lifted the chain and clasped it around her neck. The pendant settled against her sternum, and she felt the weight of it like an anchor, grounding her to a path she had never imagined walking. "I accept your offer," she said quietly. "But understand this, Kaelin Draven. I am not doing this for you or your throne. I am doing this for Torin, and for my parents, and for every other wolf who was murdered or ruined by the people you want me to help destroy. When this is over, when justice is done, I will leave. I will take my revenge and I will disappear. And you will be free to choose a proper Luna who actually wants the position. This is temporary. This is necessity. Nothing more." "Agreed." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His grip was firm, warm, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt through her that had nothing to do with magic, and everything to do with the strange connection that seemed to spark between them whenever they touched. "Tomorrow, we begin," Kaelin said. "And may the moon have mercy on anyone who stands in our way, because we will not." Alara nodded, and as she left the lunar hall and walked back through the silent corridors to her room, she felt the weight of the pendant against her chest and understood that she had just made a choice that would change everything. The Alpha King had offered her a weapon. Tomorrow, she would learn how to use it, and the council who murdered her family would finally learn that ghosts could bite. Part 3. Dawn came cold and merciless to Silverglen, the sun barely visible through clouds that pressed against the mountain peaks like a heavy shroud. Alara woke before the first bell, her body still adjusting to the unfamiliar comfort of an actual bed, her mind already racing through the implications of the choice she had made in the darkness of the lunar hall. The pendant lay against her skin, warm and pulsing with steady energy that seemed to resonate with her own heartbeat, a constant reminder that she was no longer invisible, no longer safe in the shadows. She had agreed to become a weapon. Now she would have to prove she could actually wield herself. The other candidates were already awake when she entered the preparation chamber. 19 young women from the most powerful families in the Asterian royal pack, each one groomed since birth for the possibility of standing beside the Alpha King. They turned as Alara entered, and the contempt in their eyes was immediate and unconcealed. To them, she was an insult, a mistake, a girl from a disgraced bloodline who had somehow stumbled into the final round through sheer incompetence or pity. Let them think that. Let them underestimate her one more time. The final trials would take place over 3 days, each test designed to push the candidates to their absolute limits and beyond. Today's challenge was elemental magic, the ability to command not just lunar power, but the natural forces that shaped the world itself. It was the rarest gift among wolves, usually manifesting only in those with ancient bloodlines or exceptional natural talent, and it was considered the truest test of a Luna's potential, because it required not just strength, but harmony, the ability to work with power rather than simply dominating it. They were led to a massive arena, carved into the mountainside itself, open to the sky, and surrounded by sheer cliffs that rose like the walls of a cathedral. The floor was divided into sections, each representing a different element: a pool of water deep enough to drown in, a circle of bare earth, a ring of torches that burned with unnatural intensity, and a section where the wind howled and spun in a perpetual vortex. At the far end, elevated on a platform of stone, sat the Council of Elders and the Alpha King, their faces impassive as they surveyed the candidates below. Alara felt Kaelin's eyes on her immediately, that amber gaze sharp and assessing. There was no warmth in his expression, no indication that they had spoken privately or formed any kind of alliance. To the rest of the pack, she was just another candidate, no more or less significant than any other. But the pendant around her neck pulsed once, twice. and she understood. He was watching. He was waiting to see if she would keep her promise or break under the pressure of actually competing to win. She would not break. She could not afford to. Elder Vesper stood and raised her hands for silence. The third trial tests your ability to command the elements. Each candidate will enter the arena alone and demonstrate mastery over water, earth, fire, and air. You will be judged on control, creativity, and power. Failure to successfully manipulate all four elements will result in immediate elimination. You may begin when ready. The first candidate stepped forward, a tall woman with dark hair and the confident bearing of someone who had never questioned her right to be here. She was from House Theron, one of the oldest noble families, and she moved through the elements with practiced ease. Water rose from the pool at her command, forming shapes and patterns in midair. Earth answered her call, stone reshaping itself into columns and arches. Fire danced between her fingers, obedient and controlled. And wind lifted her hair and clothing in a dramatic display that drew appreciative murmurs from the watching crowd. She was good, very good, but there was something mechanical about her performance. A sense that she was executing moves she had rehearsed 1,000 times rather than truly connecting with the power she wielded. The second candidate was less polished but more creative, coaxing the water into the shape of wolves that ran across the arena floor before dissolving into mist. The third was raw and powerful, her fire burning so hot that even the judges leaned back from the heat. One by one, they demonstrated their abilities, each performance impressive in its own way, each candidate clearly worthy of consideration for the position they sought. And then it was Alara's turn. She walked into the center of the arena on legs that felt steadier than she had expected, her chin lifted, her expression calm despite the hammering of her heart. The other candidates watched with barely concealed disdain, already dismissing her as the weakest among them, the charity case who would fail spectacularly and prove that bloodline mattered more than the council's pretense of fairness. Alara closed her eyes and reached for the pendant. The amplifier responded instantly, opening pathways in her magic that she had never known existed, channels of power that had been blocked or dormant suddenly flooding with energy that made her gasp. This was what Kaylin's mother had worn. This was what a true Luna felt when she connected fully with her gifts. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She opened her eyes and turned toward the water. She did not command it. She did not force or dominate or bend it to her will as the others had done. Instead, she asked. She reached out with her magic and whispered a request, and the water answered not because it was compelled, but because it wanted to. Rising from the pool in a column that sparkled with inner light, it moved around her like a living thing, playful and curious, responding to her thoughts and emotions rather than specific instructions. She shaped it into a sphere that floated above her palm, then released it and watched as it returned to the pool with barely a ripple. The crowd was silent now, the casual chatter dying away as they realized something unexpected was happening. Alara moved to the earth section. Again, she did not demand. She knelt and pressed her palms flat against the ground, feeling the ancient strength beneath her, the slow, patient power of stone that had stood for millennia and would stand for millennia more. She asked for its help, and the earth responded, not with violent upheaval, but with gentle cooperation. The ground beneath her hands reshaped itself, forming a perfect spiral that rose slowly from the floor, each layer smooth and precise, a structure that looked almost organic, as if it had grown there naturally. Fire came next, and this was harder. Fire was wild and hungry and destructive, and it did not like to be controlled. But Alara did not try to control it. She approached the ring of torches and reached out, not with force, but with understanding. Fire was transformation, death and rebirth, the power that consumed and cleansed. She respected it, feared it even, and that fear was what allowed her to connect with it on a level the other candidates had not managed. The flames rose at her call, but did not burn her, swirling around her body in patterns that formed shapes and symbols, ancient pack markings that the fire itself seemed to remember even if she did not consciously know them. And finally, wind. The hardest element, the most unpredictable. the one that many Luna candidates failed to master at all. Alara stood at the edge of the vortex and felt the raw power of air in motion, the force that could level forests and reshape mountains. She took a breath and stepped into the wind. It caught her immediately, trying to throw her back, to reject her presence in its domain. But she did not fight it. She let it carry her, moving with the currents rather than against them, and as she relaxed into the movement, the wind gentled. It lifted her off the ground, holding her suspended in midair as if she weighed nothing, and she laughed, the sound caught and carried by the rushing air. She raised her arms and the wind responded, forming patterns that were visible as distortions in the air itself, swirls and eddies that created shapes and images. When she finally stepped out of the vortex and returned to the center of the arena, the silence was absolute. Every eye in the crowd was fixed on her, shock and confusion, and something that might have been fear written across their faces. The candidates who had gone before her looked pale, their confidence shaken by a performance that had made theirs look clumsy by comparison. Elder Vesper stood slowly, her ancient face unreadable. That was unexpected. Alara Morthen, who taught you elemental magic? No one, Elder. Alara's voice was steady, though inside she was shaking with the aftermath of channeling so much power. I have never been formally trained in any magic. What you saw was instinct. Instinct does not account for the level of mastery you just demonstrated. Elemental magic requires years of practice, decades of study. Perhaps it requires those things when the approach is to dominate the elements. Kalen's voice cut across the arena, drawing all attention to the Alpha King. He stood from his throne, his expression neutral, but his eyes bright with something that might have been satisfaction. But the oldest texts speak of a different method, one that has been largely forgotten in favor of more aggressive techniques. The first wolves did not command the elements. They partnered with them. They understood that true power comes not from force, but from harmony. He descended from the platform and walked across the arena floor toward Alara, and she felt every wolf in the crowd tense at the unprecedented action. Alpha Kings did not enter the trial arena. They did not approach candidates directly. They observed and judged from a distance, maintaining the appearance of impartiality. But Kalen Draven had never been good at following tradition. He stopped in front of Alara, close enough that she could see the approval carefully hidden behind his formal expression. "You wear my mother's pendant," he said, his voice carrying across the arena. "Where did you acquire it?" This was a test, not for her, but for the council. He was forcing them to acknowledge what the pendant represented, to commit to a position before they understood the full implications. "You gave it to me, Your Majesty," Alara said clearly. "Last night, in the Lunar Hall, you told me it was meant for your mate, and you asked me to wear it during the trials." The reaction was immediate and explosive. The crowd erupted into shocked whispers. The candidates stared at her with expressions ranging from fury to disbelief. And on the platform, the council members leaned toward each other in urgent conversation, their careful composure finally cracking. Elder Vesper's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Silence." She turned her full attention to Kalen, and there was anger in her eyes now, barely controlled. "Your Majesty, is this true? Have you chosen a mate before the conclusion of the trials?" "The trials were designed to help me identify a suitable Luna," Kalen replied, his voice cool and utterly unconcerned by the uproar he had caused. "I have identified her. The pendant was my mother's, and by pack law, an Alpha King has the right to bestow his mother's Luna marker on the woman he intends to claim as mate. Alara Morthen wears that marker with my full knowledge and approval. The remaining trials will continue so that the pack may witness her abilities, but my choice is made. This is highly irregular. It is within my rights as Alpha King." Kalen's tone hardened. "Or do you dispute my authority to choose my own mate, Elder Vesper?" The challenge was deliberate and dangerous. If the council pushed back too hard, they would reveal their hand, expose their intention to control the king through his Luna. If they accepted his choice, they lost their leverage. Either way, Kalen had maneuvered them into a position where they could not win without openly defying the authority they claimed to support. Elder Vesper's jaw tightened. "Your authority is not in question, Your Majesty, but the pack has a right to confidence in their Luna's capabilities. Alara Morthen's performance today was impressive, but one trial does not prove her worthy of the throne. Then let the trials continue, Kaelin said smoothly. Let her prove herself beyond any possible doubt. And when she succeeds, as I know she will, the pack will have no choice but to accept my judgment. He turned to Alara, and for just a moment, his expression softened into something that might have been genuine respect. You did well, he said quietly, pitched for her ears alone. But the next 2 days will be harder. They will throw everything they have at you, every possible obstacle designed to make you fail. Are you prepared for that? I accepted this bargain knowing what it would cost, Alara replied, matching his low tone. I will not break. Not for them, and not for you. Good. He reached out, and his fingers brushed against the pendant at her throat, a gesture that to the watching crowd would look like tenderness, but was actually him channeling additional power into the amplifier, strengthening the connection between her magic and the artifact. Then show them what a true Luna looks like. Show them why I chose a wolf who understands partnership over dominance, cooperation over control. Remind them that the old ways were stronger than the traditions they have corrupted. He stepped back and returned to the platform, leaving Alara standing alone in the center of the arena with every eye upon her. The other candidates looked at her with open hatred now, their chances at the throne evaporating with the revelation of the pendant. The nobles in the crowd whispered behind their hands, already calculating how this unexpected development would affect their political alliances. And the council members sat frozen in their seats, their carefully laid plans crumbling around them. Alara lifted her chin and met their stares with cold determination. Let them hate her. Let them fear her. She had survived far worse than their disapproval, and she would use their contempt as fuel for the fire that would eventually consume them all. The second day's trial began before dawn, and this time there was no pretense of fairness. The remaining candidates were taken deep into the mountain, into tunnels that had been carved by the first wolves thousands of years ago, passages that wound through the earth like the veins of some ancient sleeping beast. They were given no instructions beyond a simple command: survive until nightfall. The tunnels were a maze designed to test not just physical strength, but mental resilience, filled with traps and illusions and predators that had been specifically introduced for the trial. Wolves who became lost could wander for days before finding their way out. Wolves who panicked could be killed by the creatures that lived in the darkness. And wolves who broke under the psychological pressure of isolation and fear would emerge damaged, if they emerged at all. Alara entered the tunnels with the other candidates, but they scattered quickly, each one determined to prove herself individually rather than working together. Within minutes, she was alone in the darkness, the only light coming from the faint phosphorescent moss that grew on the walls, barely enough to see by. She had expected this. Kaelin had warned her that the council would escalate their attempts to eliminate her, now that he had openly claimed her as his choice. The tunnels were the perfect opportunity for an accident, a convenient tragedy that could be blamed on the dangers of the trial itself. She pressed her palm against the pendant and felt its warmth, the steady pulse of power that connected her to something larger than herself. Kaelin's mother had worn this through her own trials. She had survived and claimed her place as Luna. And somewhere in the energy stored within the silver, Alara could almost feel an echo of that ancient strength, a whisper of encouragement from a woman who had walked this path before. The first attack came an hour into her journey through the tunnels. She heard the sound of claws on stone, the low rumbling growl of something massive moving in the darkness ahead. The trial was supposed to include predators, but this sound was wrong, too large and too aggressive for anything that should have been allowed in the test. Alara shifted into her wolf form, her senses sharpening as her human shape melted away into fur and muscle. Her wolf was small and pale, built for speed rather than combat, but the pendant's power flowed through her animal form just as it did her human one, strengthening her beyond her natural capabilities. The creature emerged from the shadows, and Alara's heart clenched with recognition. It was a void beast, a monster from the deep places beneath the mountains, a thing of pure darkness and hunger that had no business anywhere near candidates in a Luna trial. Void beasts were nearly impossible to kill, and could tear through even the strongest wolf in seconds. They were supposed to be extinct, hunted down centuries ago by the first wolves because their very existence threatened pack stability. Someone had deliberately released this thing into the tunnels. Someone wanted her dead badly enough to risk the lives of every candidate in the maze. The void beast lunged, and Alara dove aside, her smaller size allowing her to slip past its massive claws. She ran, not out of cowardice, but tactics, leading the creature through the tunnels while she searched for anything she could use as a weapon or advantage. Behind her, the beast roared, a sound that shook loose dust and small stones from the ceiling, and she felt its hot breath on her heels as it closed the distance between them. She needed light. Void beasts were creatures of absolute darkness, and they weakened in the presence of strong illumination. But there was no light down here, nothing but the faint glow of moss that barely qualified as luminescence, unless she made her own. Alara skidded to a halt and shifted back to human form, spinning to face the charging beast. She reached for the pendant and channeled everything she had through it, calling on the lunar magic that flowed strongest in her blood. The pendant flared with brilliant silver light, so bright it was almost painful, and the void beast screamed, a sound like metal tearing as the illumination seared through its shadowy form. It was not enough to kill it, but it was enough to hurt it, to drive it back into the deeper darkness where it belonged. Alara held the light steady until the beast's cries faded into the distance, then let it dim, her body shaking with the effort of channeling so much power at once. She had survived the first assassination attempt. There would be more. The rest of the day passed in a blur of challenges, each one carefully designed to exploit her weaknesses or put her in maximum danger. She encountered collapsing tunnels that had clearly been sabotaged, their supports weakened so they would fall at the slightest disturbance. She stumbled into a section where poison gas had been released, the air thick with toxins that would have killed her if she had not used wind magic to create a bubble of clean air around herself. She faced illusions that showed her Tauren's broken body, her parents burning. Every trauma she had ever endured replayed in perfect detail until she wanted to scream. But she did not scream. She did not break. She pushed forward, step by painful step, using every scrap of power and intelligence and sheer stubborn determination to overcome each obstacle. When she finally emerged from the tunnels as the sun set, she was bleeding from a dozen cuts, her clothing torn and filthy, her body screaming with exhaustion. But she was alive, and she was standing. Kalen was waiting at the tunnel entrance, his face carved from stone, but his eyes blazing with barely controlled fury. Who else has emerged? 12 of the 19. A guard reported. The others are still below or presumed lost. Presumed lost. Kalen's voice was deadly quiet. How many void beasts were released into those tunnels? The guard paled. Your Majesty, I have no knowledge of... Do not lie to me. The Alpha King's power rolled across the mountainside like thunder, making every wolf present drop their heads in instinctive submission. Void beasts have been extinct for 300 years. Someone deliberately introduced one into a trial meant to test Luna candidates, putting 19 lives at risk for the sake of eliminating a single target. I want to know who gave that order, and I want to know now. Your Majesty, perhaps this discussion should be held in private. Elder Vesper appeared from the crowd, her face carefully neutral. There is nothing private about an assassination attempt against my chosen mate, Kalen snarled. And make no mistake, that is exactly what this was. Someone on the council or in the noble houses decided that Alara Morthen was too dangerous to allow to succeed, and they tried to murder her under the cover of the trials. That is treason. That is a direct attack on my authority and my choice, and I will see whoever is responsible brought to justice even if I have to tear this entire pack apart to find them. He turned to Alara, and his expression shifted into something that might have been concern. You are injured. I am fine. She forced herself to stand straighter despite the pain radiating through her body. I survived. That is what matters. It matters that you were forced to survive an impossible trial in the first place. He gestured to a healer who had been waiting nearby. See to her injuries, and assign guards to her chambers. If another attempt is made on her life before the trials conclude, I will hold the entire council responsible." As the healer led Alara away, she glanced back and saw Kalen standing rigid at the tunnel entrance, his hands clenched into fists, every line of his body radiating barely contained violence. He looked like a king on the edge of war, and she realized with a strange flutter in her chest that his anger was not political calculation. He was genuinely furious that someone had tried to kill her, and that changed everything. Part 4. The healer's chambers were quiet and smelled of medicinal herbs, a sharp contrast to the blood and darkness of the tunnels. Alara sat on the edge of a padded bench while skilled hands cleaned and dressed her wounds, applying salves that eased the burning pain and wrapping bandages around cuts that would have scarred without proper treatment. She submitted to the care with silent gratitude, too exhausted to speak, her mind still replaying the moment when the Void Beast had charged from the shadows, and she had understood with perfect clarity that someone wanted her dead, not just eliminated from the trials. Dead. The healer, an older woman with silver streaking her dark hair and gentle hands that spoke of decades of practice, worked in silence for several minutes before finally speaking. "You were lucky, child. Void Beast wounds carry corruption. Another few minutes without treatment and the poison would have spread too far to reverse. How did you know what to prepare for?" Alara asked, her voice hoarse from hours of breathing the stale tunnel air. The trial was supposed to be a survival test, not a battle against extinct monsters. The healer's mouth tightened into a thin line. "I did not know. But I have served this palace for 40 years, and I have learned to prepare for the worst when the council takes an interest in specific candidates. There are always accidents during the trials, always convenient tragedies that eliminate wolves who threaten the established order." She met Alara's eyes, and there was something fierce in her gaze. "Your mother was my friend. We trained together as young wolves, before she met your father, and I chose the healer's path. When she died in that fire, I knew it was murder, but I had no proof and no power to demand justice. I have been waiting for 6 years, hoping someone from the Morthen line would survive long enough to fight back." Alara stared at her, emotions warring in her chest. "You knew my mother? I knew her. I loved her. And I have carried the guilt of her death every day since, because I saw the patterns forming and I said nothing, did nothing, warned no one." The healer's hands trembled slightly as she tied off the final bandage. "But you are here now, wearing the Luna's pendant, claiming a position beside the one king strong enough to challenge the corruption that has rotted this pack from within. So I will tell you what I should have told your mother all those years ago. There is a conspiracy within the council, a group of elders and nobles who have been systematically eliminating anyone who threatens their control over the treasury and the pack's military forces. They killed your parents because your father discovered evidence of embezzlement. They killed your brother because he overheard them planning to undermine the Alpha King's authority. And they will kill you if you give them the opportunity, because you represent everything they fear most. A Luna who cannot be bought, controlled, or intimidated. Who are they? Alara demanded, leaning forward despite the pull of her injuries. Give me names. I do not have proof, only suspicions gathered from years of watching and listening. The healer moved to a cabinet and retrieved a small leather journal, which she pressed into Alara's hands. But I have kept records. Every suspicious death, every convenient accident, every investigation that was shut down before it could uncover the truth. The patterns are there if you know how to look for them. And at the center of it all is one name that appears again and again, connected to every tragedy, every cover-up, every act of violence disguised as misfortune. Who? General Ryden Vale. The name hit Alara like a physical blow. She knew that name. Everyone in the pack knew it. Ryden Vale was a war hero, a decorated military commander who had served the Asterian royal pack for 20 years. He was popular among the soldiers, respected by the nobles, and frequently praised by the council as an example of loyalty and honor. He was untouchable. Vale commands half the royal guard, Alara said slowly, her mind racing through implications. If he is behind the conspiracy, then he has the resources to orchestrate assassinations, cover up evidence, and eliminate anyone who gets too close to the truth. But why? What does he gain from destabilizing the throne? Power. The same thing anyone gains from such schemes. The healer's voice was bitter. Vale believes he should have been named Alpha King when the old king died. He was the obvious choice by traditional standards. Experienced, ruthless, connected to every major noble house through marriage alliances and political favors. But pack law states that the crown passes through bloodline, not merit. And so the throne went to Kaelin, who was barely 20 years old and untested in battle. Vale has never forgiven that slight. He has spent the past 7 years undermining the young king's authority, building his own power base, and waiting for an opportunity to seize the throne for himself. And my family was collateral damage in his ambitions. Ilara's voice was flat, emotionless, because if she allowed herself to feel the rage building in her chest, she would lose control entirely. My parents discovered his embezzlement schemes. My brother overheard his plans. And now I am the final obstacle standing between him and complete control over the king's choice of mate. Exactly. The healer's expression was grave. The Luna trial was Vale's opportunity to place one of his own allies beside the throne, a woman who would whisper his suggestions in the king's ear and gradually erode Kaelin's power until Vale could challenge him directly without appearing to commit treason. But then the Alpha King chose you instead, a wolf with no political connections and every reason to hate the nobles who destroyed her family. You are Vale's nightmare, Ilara Morthen. You are the weapon he never saw coming. Ilara looked down at the journal in her hands, feeling the weight of years of careful documentation, evidence gathered by a woman who had been powerless to act on what she knew, but determined to preserve the truth for someone who could. Why are you telling me this now? Why risk Vale's wrath by giving me this information? Because I am dying. The healer said it simply, without drama or self-pity. I have perhaps 6 months left, maybe less. The same corruption that void beasts carry has been eating away at my lungs for years. A parting gift from a patient I treated after Vale sent him into monster-infested territory without proper backup. I have nothing left to lose and everything to atone for. If my death can contribute to Vale's downfall and justice for your family, then I will die satisfied. What is your name? Ilara asked quietly. Mira Ashton. The healer smiled, and there was genuine warmth in it, despite the shadows of pain around her eyes. Your mother used to call me Miri. She was the best wolf I ever knew, brave and kind and absolutely fearless when it came to protecting the people she loved. You have her eyes, and I think you have her courage too. Use it well, child. Make Vale pay for every life he has taken, every family he has destroyed. And when you stand beside the Alpha King as Luna, remember that true power is not found in dominance or control, but in the bonds we forge with those we choose to protect. Ilara clutched the journal to her chest and nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Mira had given her more than information. She had given her a connection to her mother, a link to a past that had been stolen from her, and a reminder that she was not alone in this fight, no matter how isolated she felt. When she finally left the healer's chambers, 2 guards were waiting outside as Kaelin had promised. They escorted her back to her rooms in silence, their expressions professionally neutral, but their postures alert, ready for threats that might come from any direction. Inside her chambers, someone had left a tray of food, fresh clothing, and a folded note sealed with the Alpha King's personal mark. Ilara broke the seal and read the message, written in sharp, precise handwriting that matched Kaelin's personality perfectly. The final trial is tomorrow. It will test your ability to lead, to make decisions under pressure, and to command the respect of wolves who currently see you as beneath them. The council will use this opportunity to humiliate you if possible, to break your confidence and prove you are unfit for the position I have chosen you to fill. Do not give them that satisfaction. Remember who you are fighting for, and remember that you are not alone in this. I will be watching, and I will intervene if they push too far. But the victory must be yours. Prove to them that a true Luna does not need royal blood or noble connections. She needs only courage, intelligence, and the will to protect her pack, even when they refuse to accept her. Sleep well, Ilara Morthen. Tomorrow, we show them what real power looks like. KD. Alara read the note twice, then tucked it away and turned her attention to the journal Mira had given her. She spent the next several hours reading through years of carefully documented evidence, her anger growing with each page as the scope of Vale's conspiracy became clear. He had not just killed her family. He had orchestrated the deaths of dozens of wolves over the past decade, anyone who threatened his plans or questioned his authority. And he had done it all while maintaining the appearance of a loyal soldier, a trusted advisor, a pillar of pack strength and stability. The evidence was damning but circumstantial. Mira had been careful to record only facts that could be verified, but without witnesses or concrete proof linking Vale directly to the crimes, the journal would not be enough to bring charges against someone of his status and influence. Alara would need more. She would need to catch him in the act of treason, or find someone willing to testify against him, or uncover physical evidence that even the council could not ignore. But first, she had to survive tomorrow's trial. And if what Kaylin had written was accurate, the final test would be designed to destroy her credibility and prove she was unworthy of standing beside the throne. She allowed herself 3 hours of sleep, though her dreams were filled with fire and blood and her brother's voice calling her name from the darkness. When she woke before dawn, she dressed in the formal clothing that had been provided for the final trial. Simple but well-made garments in deep blue that marked her as a Luna candidate. The pendant rested against her sternum, warm and steady, a constant reminder of the path she had chosen, and the alliance she had forged with a king who was as trapped by pack politics as she had been by poverty and disgrace. The final trial took place in the Grand Council Chamber, a massive hall at the heart of the palace where pack law was debated and decided. Unlike the previous tests, which had been public spectacles, this one would be witnessed only by the council, the noble houses, and a select group of high-ranking pack members. It was meant to be more intimate, more serious, a genuine evaluation of leadership potential rather than an entertainment for the masses. Alara entered the chamber to find it already full. Hundreds of wolves arranged in tiers around a central platform where 4 chairs had been placed. 3 of the chairs were occupied by candidates who had survived the tunnel trial. Young women who looked exhausted but determined, their eyes burning with the knowledge that they had one final chance to claim the position they had trained their entire lives to achieve. The 4th chair was for Alara. She took her seat and surveyed the room, recognizing faces from her childhood, nobles who had once smiled at her family and now looked at her with contempt or pity. She saw soldiers wearing Vale's colors, officers who had served under his command and likely participated in his schemes whether they realized it or not. And at the far end of the chamber, elevated on the traditional platform, sat the council and the Alpha King, their expressions unreadable. Elder Vesper stood and raised her hands for silence. The final trial tests Aluna's most essential quality, the ability to lead. Each candidate will be presented with a scenario that requires immediate decision-making under pressure. You will have limited information, competing priorities, and consequences that will affect the entire pack. Your choices will be judged not by their outcomes, which are simulated, but by your reasoning, your priorities, and your understanding of what it means to serve wolves who depend on your judgment. She gestured, and servants brought forward 4 sealed boxes, placing one in front of each candidate. Inside these boxes are your scenarios. You will have 10 minutes to read and analyze the situation, then 10 minutes to present your decision and defend it before this assembly. You may begin. Alara opened her box and pulled out a thick packet of papers, her eyes scanning the text quickly. Her scenario was brutal, designed to force her into an impossible choice with no good options. A plague has broken out in the southern territories, spreading rapidly through the villages and threatening to reach the capital within weeks. The council's chief healer reports that a cure exists, but requires a rare herb that grows only in enemy territory beyond the pack's borders. Sending a military force to retrieve the herb would be seen as an act of aggression and could trigger a war the pack is not prepared to fight. Waiting for diplomatic negotiation could take months, by which time thousands will have died. Additionally, there are reports that some noble families are hoarding supplies of the herb for their own protection. refusing to share with common wolves who cannot afford the exorbitant prices being demanded. You are Luna. The Alpha King is away on the northern border dealing with a separate crisis and cannot be reached for consultation. The council is divided, with half demanding military action and half insisting on diplomacy. The common wolves are beginning to riot, attacking the homes of nobles they believe are profiteering from the plague. Violence is spreading. The pack is fracturing. You must make a decision immediately. What do you do? It was designed to make her fail. Every option was terrible. Military action risked war. Diplomacy meant accepting mass casualties. And addressing the noble hoarding would put her in direct conflict with the most powerful families in the pack, families who already hated her and would use any excuse to undermine her authority. But as Alara read through the scenario again, she realized something. This was not actually about the plague. This was about the council testing whether she would make decisions that served common wolves or protected noble interests. They wanted to see if she could be controlled, if her poverty and low status would make her sympathetic to the masses in ways that threatened aristocratic power. They had given her a scenario designed to expose her priorities, so she would show them exactly where her loyalties lay, and force them to reject her openly, or accept a Luna who would never serve their interests. When the 10 minutes ended and it was her turn to present, Alara stood and faced the assembly with calm confidence, Mira's journal tucked securely in her pocket and her mother's courage burning in her chest. The scenario presents 3 interconnected problems, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. A medical crisis, a political crisis, and a moral crisis. Most candidates would prioritize one over the others, but that approach fails to understand that in a pack, everything is connected. We cannot solve the plague without addressing the hoarding, and we cannot address the hoarding without confronting the political corruption that allows nobles to exploit common wolves in times of desperation. She saw several council members shift uncomfortably, but she did not pause. My first action would be to invoke Luna's right of emergency requisition, an ancient law that allows the Luna to seize private resources during pack-wide crises. I would send guards to every noble house holding the herb and confiscate their supplies immediately, redistributing them to healers who can treat the sick regardless of status or ability to pay. Any noble who resists would be charged with treason for prioritizing personal profit over pack survival. The nobles in the audience erupted in outrage, but Elder Vesper raised her hand for silence. Continue. Second, I would authorize a small covert team to cross the border and retrieve additional supplies of the herb, but I would send diplomats simultaneously to negotiate a formal trade agreement. The military action would be framed as an emergency measure, not an invasion, and the diplomatic mission would provide cover and eventual legitimacy. We address the immediate crisis while building a sustainable solution for the future. And if the enemy territory views this as an act of war, one of the council members challenged, then we defend ourselves, but we do so from a position of moral authority. We did not invade for conquest or greed. We crossed a border to save lives during a plague that threatened thousands of our own wolves. Any pack that would start a war over such an action reveals itself as hostile, regardless of whether we took action or not, and we are better off knowing that truth sooner rather than later. She turned to address the wider assembly. But most importantly, this crisis reveals a fundamental problem with how we structure pack resources and authority. Noble families were able to hoard medicine because they have been allowed to accumulate wealth and power without accountability to common wolves who depend on pack leadership for protection. This is not just about a plague. This is about a system that permits the strong to exploit the weak. And as Luna, I would work to reform that system so that such crises cannot occur in the future. We are one pack. We survive together or we die separately. And any law or tradition that divides us into noble and common, worthy and expendable, strong and weak, is a threat to our collective survival. The silence that followed her speech was absolute. She had not just answered the scenario. She had declared war on the entire aristocratic power structure, openly challenged the nobles who controlled most of the pack's wealth, and committed herself to reforms that would strip them of privileges they had enjoyed for generations. And judging by the expressions in the crowd, Half the room wanted to kill her, and the other half was too shocked to respond. Elder Vesper cleared her throat. That was a thorough analysis. Does any council member wish to challenge the candidate's reasoning? I do. The voice came from the back of the chamber, deep and commanding, and Alara felt ice flood through her veins as General Ryden Vale stepped forward from where he had been standing among the soldiers. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and powerful, with the kind of presence that dominated any room he entered. His hair was silver-streaked dark brown, his face marked with scars that spoke of decades of combat, and his eyes were cold and calculating as they fixed on Alara with undisguised contempt. The candidate speaks of Luna's right of emergency requisition as if it is a simple matter, Vale said, his tone pleasant, but his words carrying an edge like a knife pressed against skin. But that ancient law has not been invoked in over 200 years, and for good reason. It gives the Luna absolute authority to seize property without oversight or due process, a power that could easily be abused by someone with an agenda against the noble houses. How do we know you would not use such authority to settle personal grievances or redistribute wealth according to your own sense of fairness rather than actual need? It was a direct attack, questioning her integrity and implying she would abuse power for revenge. Alara met his eyes and saw the calculation there, the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. You are correct that Luna's right has not been invoked recently, she said calmly, but that does not make it invalid or inappropriate. It exists precisely for situations where normal political processes would result in preventable deaths. And as for abuse of power, I would point out that the current system already allows nobles to hoard resources and profit from pack suffering without consequence. Which is more dangerous? Temporary emergency authority used to save lives, or permanent structural authority used to exploit the vulnerable? You speak as if nobles are the enemy, Vale countered, as if wealth and status are inherently corrupt. But the noble houses have served this pack for centuries, providing leadership and resources that common wolves cannot provide for themselves. Your scenario presents a false choice between helping common wolves and protecting noble rights, when in reality the pack's strength depends on maintaining the hierarchy that has sustained us for generations. The pack's strength depends on the willingness of every wolf to sacrifice for the collective good, Alara shot back. And when nobles prioritize personal profit over pack survival, they forfeit any claim to special protection. I do not view wealth or status as inherently corrupt, General Vale. I view the abuse of power as corrupt, regardless of who wields it. And I view any system that allows some wolves to die so that others can profit as fundamentally broken. Vale's expression hardened. And who decides what constitutes abuse? Who determines which wolves deserve protection and which deserve to have their property seized? You are proposing to make yourself judge and executioner, accountable to no one, operating based on your personal sense of justice rather than established law. That is not leadership. That is tyranny. No. Kalen's voice cut through the chamber like a blade, and every head turned toward the Alpha King. He rose from his throne, his presence filling the space with undeniable authority. Tyranny is allowing common wolves to die of plague while nobles hoard medicine. Tyranny is permitting a general to orchestrate assassinations and cover them up as accidents because his position makes him untouchable. Tyranny is a council that prioritizes maintaining their own power over protecting the pack they claim to serve. He descended from the platform and walked across the chamber floor until he stood beside Alara, a statement of solidarity that could not be misinterpreted. The candidate's reasoning is sound, her priorities are correct, and her willingness to challenge entrenched power is exactly what this pack needs in a Luna. General Vale, your objections are noted, but they reveal more about your own interests than about any flaw in her analysis. Vale's face flushed with barely controlled rage. Your Majesty, I am merely attempting to ensure that the Luna we crown is capable of balanced judgment rather than what? Kalen's tone was dangerously soft. Rather than threatening your position? Rather than questioning the authority you have spent years cultivating? Rather than exposing the conspiracy you have built within my own guard and council? The chamber exploded into chaos. Part 5. The chamber descended into pandemonium. Nobles shouted over one another, soldiers moved toward their weapons, and the council members rose from their seats in unified shock. Through it all, General Ryden Vale stood frozen, his face a mask of carefully controlled fury. But Alara could see the calculation behind his eyes, the rapid assessment of options and outcomes that came from decades of military strategy. He was deciding whether to flee or fight. Kalen raised his hand, and his alpha authority rolled through the room like a physical force, compelling silence from every wolf present whether they wanted to obey or not. The power was absolute, undeniable, a reminder that despite all the political maneuvering and careful conspiracies, the Alpha King was still the most dangerous wolf in the territory when he chose to exercise his full strength. "General Vale," Kalen said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber, "I am formally accusing you of treason against the Asterian royal pack. The charges include conspiracy to embezzle from the royal treasury, orchestrating the murders of pack members who discovered evidence of your crimes, attempting to undermine my authority through political manipulation, and most recently, introducing a void beast into the Luna trials with the intent to assassinate my chosen mate. How do you answer these charges?" Vale's expression shifted from shock to cold contempt. These are the desperate accusations of a young king who feels his authority slipping away. You have no proof, Your Majesty. Only paranoia and the word of a disgraced girl who will say anything to achieve power she does not deserve. I have proof. Alara stepped forward, pulling Mira's journal from her pocket and holding it up for the assembly to see. This journal documents 23 suspicious deaths over the past 10 years. All of wolves who had access to information about treasury discrepancies or who served in positions that would have allowed them to witness council meetings where such matters were discussed. Every single death was ruled an accident or natural causes. Every single investigation was shut down within days. And every single case has one name appearing in the official reports as the officer who confirmed the findings, General Ryden Vale. She opened the journal to a marked page and began to read. 3 years ago, my brother Torin Morthen provided security for a council session where members were arguing about missing funds. 2 weeks later, he was found dead in the river, throat torn out, officially ruled a rogue wolf attack. But the healer who examined his body noted that the wounds were inconsistent with wolf claws, that they appeared to have been made by a blade designed to mimic animal attacks. That report was sealed the same day by General Vale's authority, and the healer was forcibly retired from service within the month. She looked up and met Vale's eyes across the chamber. That healer was Mira Ashton. She was my mother's friend. And before she dies from the lung corruption, she contracted treating one of your soldiers after you deliberately sent him into monster territory without proper equipment. She gave me this journal and told me everything she has witnessed over the past decade. You are not untouchable, General. You are simply a murderer who has been very careful about covering his tracks. Until now. Vale's control finally cracked. The ravings of a dying woman and a disgraced child are not evidence. They are slander, and I will not stand here and allow— Then perhaps you will stand for this. Kalen gestured, and the chamber doors opened to admit a group of soldiers escorting a prisoner. The man was middle-aged, scarred and worn, with the look of someone who had spent years carrying terrible secrets. Alara did not recognize him, but she saw Vale's face go white with recognition. "This is Captain Dane Wolf," Kalen announced. He served under General Vale for 15 years, participating in operations that he believed were sanctioned by council authority. 3 days ago, he came to me with information about those operations, including detailed accounts of assassinations carried out on Vale's orders. Captain Wolf is prepared to testify that Vale maintains a private unit within the Royal Guard, soldiers loyal to him personally rather than to the throne, and that this unit has been used to eliminate threats to Vale's political ambitions for the past decade. Captain Wolf stepped forward, his voice rough but steady. I killed Torin Morthen on General Vale's orders. I was told he had discovered evidence of treasury theft, and that he planned to bring it directly to the Alpha King, bypassing the council. Vale said the information would destabilize the pack if it became public, that we were protecting pack unity by silencing a troublemaker. I believed him. I followed orders. and I have carried the guilt of that murder for 3 years, watching as Vale continued to consolidate power and eliminate anyone who questioned his authority. He turned to face Alara, and there were tears in his eyes. I am sorry. I know that means nothing, that it cannot bring your brother back or ease your pain, but I am prepared to face justice for what I did, and I am prepared to testify against the man who ordered it done. The chamber erupted again, but this time the noise was different. Shock had given way to anger as wolves began to comprehend the scope of Vale's conspiracy. Nobles who had supported him edged away, suddenly eager to distance themselves from a sinking ship. Soldiers looked at each other with confusion and betrayal, realizing that the general they had trusted had been using them as tools for murder. Vale saw his support crumbling in real time, and Alara watched as his expression shifted from denial to calculation to cold fury. This is a setup. The Alpha King has fabricated evidence and coerced testimony from a man with obvious reasons to lie. None of this would stand up to proper investigation. Then let there be an investigation. Elder Vesper's voice cut through the noise, and all eyes turned to the council. The ancient woman looked older than Alara had ever seen her, exhaustion and disgust written across her face. I have served this council for 50 years. I have made compromises and turned blind eyes to injustices in the name of pack stability, but I will not sanction murder. I will not protect a traitor simply because he holds rank and influence. She turned to Kaelin. Your Majesty, the Council formally recognizes your authority to detain General Vale pending a full investigation into these charges. If the evidence supports your accusations, he will be tried for treason and face the full consequences of pack law. Vale's hand moved toward his weapon, a subtle shift that might have gone unnoticed by anyone not watching for it. But Alara saw it, and Kaelin saw it, and in that moment she understood that Vale had made his final calculation and decided that if he was going down, he would take the Alpha King with him. Kaelin, she shouted, even as Vale's hand closed around the hilt of his sword and pulled it free in one smooth motion. The general was fast, faster than a man his age had any right to be, his blade cutting through the air toward the Alpha King's throat with lethal precision. But Kaelin was faster, his own weapon appearing in his hand as if summoned by thought alone, meeting Vale's strike with a clash of steel that rang through the chamber like a bell. They broke apart and circled each other, the assembled wolves scattering to clear the floor, and Alara felt her wolf surge forward with desperate instinct. She could not let Kaelin face this threat alone. Not when Vale had spent 20 years perfecting his combat skills, while Kaelin had spent 7 years trapped behind a throne trying to fight corruption with politics instead of steel. She shifted mid-step, her human form melting into her pale silver wolf, and she lunged at Vale from the side even as he prepared another strike at Kaelin. Her teeth closed on his sword arm, not enough to sever it, but enough to throw off his aim, and Vale roared with pain and fury as he tried to shake her loose. Kaelin used the opening, his blade slicing across Vale's chest and drawing blood. The general stumbled back, his expression twisted with rage. You think you can defeat me? I have fought wars while you played at being king. I have earned my position through blood and steel while you inherited yours through an accident of birth. You are nothing. You are a child wearing a crown he does not deserve. And when I kill you, the pack will thank me for ending your pathetic reign. Then come and try, Kaelin snarled, his alpha power rolling through the chamber with such force that several wolves dropped to their knees involuntarily. But know that when you fall not to a child, but to the Alpha King you were too arrogant to take seriously, and to the Luna you were too blind to see as the threat she represented. They clashed again, and this time the fight was brutal and desperate. Two powerful wolves with everything to lose battling for dominance while the entire pack watched. Vale fought with the experience of decades, his movements economical and precise, every strike calculated to exploit openings and weaknesses. But Kaelin fought with the speed and adaptability of youth, his style more fluid and unpredictable, constantly shifting to deny Vale the patterns he relied on. Alara circled them in her wolf form, looking for another opening, her instincts screaming at her to protect her king, even as her rational mind recognized that interfering too much would undermine Kaelin's authority. This needed to be his victory, his proof that he was strong enough to lead and defend the pack against threats both external and internal. But when Vale managed to land a solid hit that sent Kaelin staggering back with blood streaming from a cut along his ribs, Alara's control shattered. She lunged again, this time going for Vale's throat, and the general was forced to turn his attention to her, his blade swinging in a deadly arc that would have beheaded her if she had not twisted away at the last second. Pathetic. Vale spat, his attention split between Kaelin and Alara. You fight together because neither of you is strong enough alone. This is what the pack has come to? A weak king and his rabid pet, pretending to be rulers while real wolves laugh at your incompetence? We fight together, Kaelin said, his voice steady despite his injury. Because that is what mates do. Because pack strength is not about individual dominance, but about wolves protecting each other and standing together against threats. You have spent so long fighting alone, Vale, accumulating power and eliminating rivals, that you have forgotten what it means to have someone at your back you can actually trust. He attacked again, and this time, Alara moved in perfect synchronization with him, the two of them working as a unit despite never having trained together. Instinct and the strange bond forming between them, allowing them to anticipate each other's movements. Vale found himself defending from two directions, his superior experience negated by the simple fact that he was one wolf fighting two, and no matter how skilled he was, he could not be in two places at once. The pendant around Alara's neck pulsed with warmth, and she felt power flow through the bond between her and Kaelin, lunar magic amplifying their natural abilities until they moved faster, hit harder, their coordination becoming supernatural. This was what the old texts spoke of, the reason Luna and Alpha were meant to rule together, because together they became something greater than the sum of their individual strengths. Vale must have realized he was losing because his expression shifted from confidence to desperation, and he did something that no honorable wolf would ever do in a formal challenge. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a vial of black liquid, uncorking it with his teeth and throwing the contents toward Alara. Void essence. The distilled corruption of the beasts that lived in the deep places, deadly to any wolf it touched, burning through flesh and bone like acid. Kaelin moved without thought, shoving Alara aside and taking the full force of the void essence across his shoulder and chest. He screamed, the sound torn from his throat as the corruption seared through him, and dropped to one knee, his sword clattering to the floor. Alara shifted back to human form, rage and terror warring in her chest. The pendant blazed against her skin, responding to her desperation, and she reached for it with both hands and channeled everything she had through the amplifier. Lunar magic erupted from her in a wave of pure silver light, so bright it was painful to look at directly, and the light struck Vale full in the chest and lifted him off his feet. He flew backward and hit the far wall with enough force to crack stone, then crumpled to the floor and did not rise. The void essence on Kaelin's skin hissed and smoked as the lunar magic burned it away, cleansing the corruption before it could spread deeper. He gasped, his face gray with pain, but he was alive and the wound was already beginning to heal, accelerated by the power Alara was pouring into him through their nascent bond. Soldiers rushed forward to secure Vale, checking for signs of life and finding only a weak pulse. The general had survived, but barely, and he would face trial as a prisoner rather than a corpse. Elder Vesper approached slowly, her expression unreadable as she looked between Kaelin and Alara. That was Luna magic, she said quietly. Full-bonded Luna magic, the kind that only manifests when the connection between Alpha and Luna is complete and recognized by pack law and lunar blessing. You are not yet formally mated. You should not have been able to channel power through him at all, much less with that level of intensity. The bond recognizes what we need it to recognize, Kaelin said, his voice strained but steady as he climbed to his feet with Alara's help. Pack law may require formal ceremonies and council approval, but the moon itself knows its own. Alara Morthen has proven herself worthy of the Luna position in every possible way. She has survived assassination attempts. She has demonstrated elemental mastery and strategic thinking. She has stood beside me in battle against a traitor. and she has channeled magic that saved my life at the cost of her own safety. If the council wishes to reject her after everything they have witnessed, then you are rejecting not just her but the moon's own judgment." The chamber was silent, every wolf present understanding the weight of what had just occurred. To reject Aluna after the bond had manifested, after she had demonstrated the full scope of her power and loyalty, would be to defy pack law and lunar blessing both. The council would lose all credibility, and the nobles who supported such a decision would mark themselves as enemies of the throne. Elder Vesper looked at the other council members, then back at Kaelin and Alara, and finally she bowed her head in acknowledgement. The council recognizes Alara Morthen as Luna Chosen of the Asterian Royal Pack. The formal coronation ceremony will take place within the week, once the Alpha King has recovered from his injuries, and the investigation into General Vale's conspiracy has concluded. All those who conspired with him will be brought to justice, regardless of their rank or family connections. This corruption ends today. The declaration was met with a mixture of relief and fear from the assembled wolves, those who had profited from Vale's schemes suddenly realizing their own positions were now precarious, while those who had suffered under the conspiracy felt hope for the first time in years. Kaelin turned to Alara, and despite his injuries, despite the blood and exhaustion, he smiled. "You saved my life. You saved mine first, in the tunnels," she replied. "And you gave me the opportunity to stand beside you and fight for something that actually matters. I told you this was temporary, that I would leave once justice was done. But I think," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "I think maybe I was wrong. Maybe this is where I am supposed to be, not because fate or destiny demanded it, but because we chose it. Because together we can build something better than what came before." "Together," Kaelin agreed, and he took her hand, their fingers intertwining, the pendant pulsing warmly between them. "We will expose every conspirator. We will reform the laws that allowed this corruption to flourish. We will ensure that no other family suffers what yours suffered, what mine suffered. And we will do it not as king and subject, but as partners, as equals, as Alpha and Luna, bound not by political necessity, but by shared purpose and genuine trust." Alara looked out at the assembled wolves, at the nobles who feared her, and the common wolves who looked at her with hope. And she understood that this was just the beginning. Vale had been arrested, but his conspiracy ran deep, and rooting it out completely would take time and effort and constant vigilance. There would be more battles, more threats, more attempts to undermine the changes she and Kaelin wanted to implement. But she was no longer alone. She was no longer invisible. She was Luna Chosen, standing beside an Alpha King who had proven he would fight for justice even when it threatened his own position, and together they would rebuild the pack into something worthy of the wolves who depended on them for protection and leadership. The coronation ceremony took place exactly 1 week later in the grand arena where the Luna trials had begun. The entire pack attended, nobles and commoners alike, packed into the tiers of seating that surrounded the central platform. The sky was clear and bright, the sun shining down on what should have been a celebration, though the mood was tempered by the ongoing investigation into Vale's conspiracy that had already resulted in a dozen arrests, including 3 council members and multiple high-ranking nobles. Alara stood before the assembled pack wearing formal Luna robes, deep blue edged with silver, the pendant gleaming at her throat. Beside her, Kaelin wore the traditional black and silver of the Alpha King, his injuries from the fight with Vale already healed, though the scars would remain as reminders of how close they had come to disaster. Elder Vesper, who had been cleared of any involvement in the conspiracy and had in fact provided crucial testimony about irregularities she had noticed but been unable to prove, performed the ceremony. "By the authority vested in me by pack law and lunar blessing, I present to you Alara Morthen, Luna of the Asterian Royal Pack. She has proven herself through trial, through combat, and through magic. She has earned her position not through birth or connection, but through courage, intelligence, and dedication to pack welfare. All wolves are required to show her the respect and obedience owed to one who stands beside the throne." The crowd's response was mixed. The common wolves cheered, genuinely happy to see one of their own elevated to the highest position in the pack. The nobles were more reserved, many still resentful of having their power structures challenged, though they applauded politely because to do otherwise would mark them as potential conspirators. Kaelin stepped forward and took Alara's hands, his voice carrying across the arena. "I claim Alara Morthen as my mate and Luna. I pledge to stand beside her, to protect her, to value her counsel and respect her judgment. Together we will serve this pack with honor and strength, and we will ensure that every wolf, regardless of birth or status, receives the protection and justice they deserve." He leaned forward and kissed her, and as their lips met, the pendant flared with brilliant light, the bond between them solidifying in a way that every wolf present could feel, a surge of power that rolled through the entire territory and marked them as truly mated in the eyes of magic and moon. When they broke apart, Alara turned to face the pack and spoke her first words as Luna. "I stand before you as an orphan, as a wolf from a disgraced family, as someone who has known poverty and loss and injustice. I know what it is to be dismissed, to be powerless, to watch as those with authority abuse that power without consequence. And I promise you that as your Luna, I will never forget where I came from or what I survived to stand here today. I will fight for reforms that protect the vulnerable. I will expose corruption wherever I find it. And I will ensure that this pack becomes a place where every wolf can thrive, not just those born into the right families or blessed with wealth and connections." She paused, letting her words settle over the crowd. General Vale believed he could maintain control through fear and violence. He believed that killing anyone who questioned him would secure his power forever. He was wrong. We are stronger than fear. We are stronger than corruption. And we will build a future worthy of the wolves who gave their lives trying to expose the truth. That is my vow to you as Luna. That is the promise I make on behalf of every family that was destroyed by Vale's conspiracy. Justice, reform, and a pack united not by hierarchy and fear, but by genuine strength and mutual respect. The common wolves erupted in cheers, their voices rising in a wave of sound that rolled through the arena. Even some of the nobles joined in, those who were intelligent enough to recognize that the old order was crumbling, and their survival depended on adapting to the new reality Alara and Kaelin were creating. After the ceremony, as the pack dispersed to the celebration feast that had been prepared, Alara found herself standing alone for a moment on the platform, looking out over Silver Glen and the mountains beyond. Kaelin appeared beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Having second thoughts?" he asked. "No, just remembering." She leaned into his warmth, allowing herself the comfort she had denied herself for so long. 6 years ago, I stood at my brother's pyre and promised myself I would find out what happened to him. I would make the people responsible pay, and then I would disappear, because I believed that visibility meant death and justice was impossible for wolves like me. And now I am the most visible wolf in the entire pack, standing beside the Alpha King, wearing the Luna's pendant, with the power to actually implement the changes I only dreamed about before. She turned to look at him. "You gave me that. You saw past the act I was performing in the arena. You recognized what I was hiding, and instead of seeing me as a threat, you saw me as an ally. Why? Because I needed you," Kaelin said simply. "Because I was drowning in political games I did not know how to win, surrounded by enemies I could not identify, trapped by traditions I could not break without losing the authority I needed to rule effectively. You were the weapon I needed to break free of that trap. But somewhere between offering you that alliance and standing beside you in battle against Vale, you became something more than a weapon. You became a partner, an equal, someone I actually trust, which is the rarest gift anyone has ever given me. Trust is earned, not given," Alara smiled, "and we are still earning it from each other, learning how this partnership works, figuring out how to lead together instead of fighting for dominance. But I think we will get there. I think we can build something real here, something that actually serves the pack instead of exploiting it." "Together," Kaelin agreed, and he kissed her again, softer this time, with genuine affection rather than just formal display. When they broke apart, Mira was waiting at the edge of the platform, supported by 2 healers, but determined to witness the coronation despite her failing health. Alara rushed to her side. "You should be resting. I will rest when I am dead, which will be soon enough." Mira's smile was peaceful, despite the pain evident in her eyes. "But I needed to see this. I needed to watch your mother's daughter stand as Luna beside an Alpha King brave enough to challenge corruption. I needed to know that all those years of documenting evidence and carrying secrets actually mattered in the end. It mattered," Alara said fiercely. "Without your journal, we would never have been able to build a case against Vale. Without your testimony, the council might have dismissed the accusations as political theater. You saved us, Mira. You gave me the weapon I needed to fight back. No, child, I gave you information. You are the weapon. You always were." Mira reached up and touched Alara's face with a trembling hand. "Your mother would be so proud. She raised you to be strong and brave and uncompromising in your pursuit of justice, and you have honored her memory better than she ever could have imagined. Now go. Celebrate your coronation. Build your future with that young king who looks at you like you hung the moon. And remember that you are not alone anymore. You have a mate, you have a pack, and you have the power to actually change things for the better." Alara embraced her carefully, mindful of her fragility, and whispered, "Thank you for everything." Mira died 3 days later, peacefully in her sleep, her purpose fulfilled and her conscience finally clear. Alara attended her funeral alongside Kaelin, and they ensured that Mira was honored as a hero of the pack, a wolf who had kept faith with justice even when doing so was dangerous and lonely. The investigation into Vale's conspiracy continued for months, slowly unraveling a web of corruption that stretched back over a decade. They discovered evidence of embezzlement on a massive scale, funds siphoned from the royal treasury to finance Vale's private army and pay off nobles who supported his ambitions. They found records of over 30 assassinations, wolves killed because they discovered too much or asked too many questions. And they uncovered a plot to stage a coup that would have removed Kaelin from the throne and installed Vale as Alpha King, a plan that had only been delayed by the Luna trials forcing Vale to shift his strategy. Every conspirator was brought to trial. Some fled the territory and were declared exiles, hunted by the pack they had betrayed. Others faced justice and accepted their punishments with varying degrees of dignity. And Vale himself was convicted of treason and executed according to pack law, his death witnessed by the families of the wolves he had murdered, including Alara, who stood beside Kaelin as the sentence was carried out. It was not satisfying. Justice never was, she discovered. It did not bring back the dead or heal the wounds left by their absence, but it was necessary, and it was final, and it meant that no other family would suffer as hers had suffered. In the months that followed, Alara and Kaelin implemented the reforms they had promised. They restructured pack finances to provide oversight and transparency, making it nearly impossible for future embezzlement to occur. They reformed the laws surrounding emergency authority, ensuring that Luna's right could be invoked when necessary, but with safeguards against abuse. They established a council of common wolves who could bring grievances directly to the throne without going through noble intermediaries. And they began the slow work of redistributing power so that the pack's strength came from unity rather than hierarchy. It was exhausting work, met with resistance at every turn from nobles who clung to their privileges and traditions. But Alara discovered that she was good at it, good at seeing through political maneuvering to the core issues, good at building coalitions among wolves who had never had a voice before, good at standing firm against pressure and refusing to compromise on principles that actually mattered. And through it all, Kaelin stood beside her, their bond growing stronger as they learned to work together not just in battle, but in the daily grind of governance. They fought sometimes, their strong personalities clashing over strategy and priorities, but they also learned to trust each other's judgment, to value each other's strengths, and to recognize that they were better together than either would have been alone. 1 year after her coronation, Alara stood once again at the edge of the platform overlooking Silverglen. But this time she was not alone. Kaylin was beside her, their hands clasped, the pendant warm against her skin. Below them, the pack gathered for the anniversary celebration, and looking out at the crowd, Alara could see the changes they had wrought. Common wolves stood beside nobles with less visible tension. Children played without the weight of knowing their opportunities would be limited by birth. And over the main gate, carved in stone for all to see, were the words she had insisted be placed there as a reminder and a promise. One pack, one truth, justice for all. "Do you ever regret it?" Kaylin asked quietly. "Accepting the alliance I offered? Becoming Luna instead of disappearing into the shadows as you planned?" Alara considered the question seriously, looking back at the girl she had been a year ago, desperate and broken and convinced that survival meant remaining invisible. "No," she said finally. "I regret the circumstances that forced the choice. I regret that my family had to die before justice could be pursued. I regret every wolf who suffered under Vale's conspiracy while I was still too weak to fight back. But I do not regret standing beside you. I do not regret becoming Luna. Because this position, this power, this opportunity to actually change things for the better, this is what I have been fighting for all along, even when I did not realize it. Not revenge, not just justice, but the chance to build something worthy of the wolves who gave their lives trying to protect the truth." She turned to face him fully. "You gave me that chance. You saw potential in a girl who was trying desperately to fail, and instead of using me as a pawn in your political games, you treated me as an equal. You trusted me when I had given you no reason to trust, and you stood beside me when it would have been safer and easier to let me fall. That is why this works. That is why we work. Not because the moon decided we were fated mates, but because we chose each other, deliberately and consciously, knowing exactly what we were committing to." Kaylin pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "Together," he murmured. "Together," Alara agreed. "Always." And as the sun set over Silver Glen, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Luna and Alpha stood united, their bond forged not in destiny but in choice, their power derived not from dominance but from partnership, their future built on the foundation of wolves who refused to surrender to corruption and fear. The pack had been broken, they had rebuilt it stronger, and together, they would ensure it never fell again.